This is Maps and Mapping, and we're going to talk about geographic information systems. That's the GIS part of ArcGIS, which you'll learn more about next week from the Esri people, the owners of ArcGIS. And we're going to talk about story maps with Joe's demo and then any discussion we might have afterwards. So I wanted to start by saying that when I was 12, I became the map reader and navigator in my family. My mom was a new driver at age 45, and we used to drive from Los Angeles to New Mexico and spend a month visiting my grandparents every year. Growing up in Los Angeles, being able to read a map was essential to getting around the megalopolis. And in high school, I was a Fuller Brushman, which is a door-to-door salesman. And I used to have to use the Thomas Guide, which was a complete book of maps just for the Los Angeles area. There's probably 200 pages in there. But I needed that to go to my territory, mark out my territory, and work all my different territories through the year. You'd cycle through these areas. After high school, my girlfriend and I went to the California Automobile Association, which I think was the founder of the AAA, the American Automobile Association. I may have that backwards. And ordered maps for Canada and the United States to plan our big summer trip. So we didn't tour Europe. We drove from Los Angeles to Vancouver, British Columbia, and then the length of the brand new Trans-Canada Highway to St. John's, Newfoundland. After we took the ferry back to Nova Scotia, you had to take a ferry out to Newfoundland. We explored the coast of Maine, Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C., before visiting her relatives in Tennessee and my relatives in New Mexico on our way back to Los Angeles. I traveled across the United States several more times before the internet, and maps were essential for both planning the trip and discovering new things when you're lost. Now we're connected via satellite and can determine our global position by satellite most of the time and use our map applications to figure out where we are and how we got to where we're going. Also, these mapping applications do push commercial establishments at us, so even the technology helps us discover new things. In my recent trips across North America, I never had to look at a physical map. I was able to use my devices to plan my trip, making reservations for lodging and meals beforehand on my computer and on the fly with my personal device. I wonder how this affects my memories and my ability to find my way around without GPS. It's something that it'll take decades probably to figure out. So I showed just a couple of the very earliest maps. They were clay tablets, clay or stone tablets. These are just images. So as we learned last week, if you talk and throw some images up, everybody's brain connects them. So going on that theory. On the left here is a Chinese map, a portion of a Chinese map, which for a long time was attributed to the bottom right, Father Ricci, a Jesuit priest from 1684, but recent scholarship has determined that actually Ricci just copied a map from around 1400, which shows, you can see at the bottom half of the large square on the left, you can see North America. So the Chinese were well aware of the Americas around 1400, nearly 100 years before Columbus. And this was proven through the scholarship that there were things on the Chinese map that Europeans couldn't possibly have known, even in 1684. So then the top right corner is a map on a piece of skin, obviously, and it's the earliest explorer's map that I could find. So 1500, right after Columbus. These are just three of my favorite maps of California. Until 1750, California was thought to be an island, which is shocking because the Spanish had already walked across North America 100 years before or more, but the cartographers kept showing California as an island based on the fact that there's an inland sea separating Baja California, or California Sur, from Mexico. And for hundreds of years, people thought California was an island, which I just love that. So don't believe all the maps you see, I guess is the takeaway from that. And here are three modern maps. So on the left is a Spillhouse projection, 1942, that centers the ocean rather than the land. And in this orientation, you can rotate it around. Obviously, it doesn't matter which way you point it. In this rotation, at the very top, you can see Baja California and Mexico, the Isthmus of Panama. You can see those little fingers up at the very top of the map. And then correspondingly, at the bottom of the map, you can see Maine and Florida. And so the rest of the world is distributed around. Africa is the one where the continent that you can see the entire continent. Then Buckminster Fuller, based on his geodesic dome and the math of the geodesic dome, made this flat map projection, which is much more accurate than the standard Mercator projections that we're used to. It looks funny, but the size of the continents are much more accurate than the way Westerners visualize a map of the world. And then on the right is a brand new map that's the most accurate map yet, they say. There's almost no distortion. And they generated the map so that it's like a record that if you flip it over, it precisely corresponds to the alternate side. So it's a flat map that's made to be two-sided. And so when you look at it, you can flip it over and you're just continuing the globe, as it were, on this flat map. So that's an interesting projection. And there you can see much more accurately. For instance, in the bottom half, which is Eurasia and North America, you can see the relative size between China and Russia and Canada and the United States, which on a Mercator map, they look to be of similar sizes, but they aren't. I'll be referencing this sort of the Bible of map making, supposedly, as how maps work. It's 30 years old, but he was already looking to the future and was talking about geographic information systems and artificial intelligence, all kinds of things. This picture is from the National Geographic, and it's not a picture of any place. It's no place, but it has all the features of a map. So you can see that there's a mountain peak and a mountain range and an isthmus and a canal and a sound and a lake and a waterfall. So you can find these online. There's a lot of different ones, but I like this one's, very detailed. And a lot of them are more coastal. This one went all the way to mesa, desert, oasis, escarpment, plateau. So for those of you in New Mexico, you'll recognize the features on the right-hand side. My Zoom thing's in the way. Can I move it? Yeah. So I don't know how to pronounce his name, Macatron, not sure, Scottish name I haven't run across. He focuses on three types of information that a map presents. Lexical, which is the text, functional, which is the geographic information, and then cognitive is the way those two types of information are presented to the audience and how the audience, based on their experience with maps and their, of course, personal experience, how they interact with the information you're presenting. So as we're building story maps, I want you to keep these three things in mind. You've got your text, you've got your images, and you want to put it together in a way that you're getting your story across to the audience. So it's kind of like using your design as a spotlight to make sure that you're foregrounding the things that you want your audience to take away. I will share these slides. There's a lot of text on a couple slides, which I know is breaking the rules, but it's there for you to go back and read later if that's something you want to do. So on the left, in mapping, maps are made of layers. And this was the simplest image I could find. Esri, the company that makes story maps and makes ArcGIS and several other products, is the leading digital map maker in the world. Once you realize Esri, ESRI, I forget what it stands for, when you go to a weather site, or if you have an earthquake and you check the USGS, or if you're in the military or go to military sites, anywhere you see a map, if you look down in the bottom corner, you'll 9 times out of 10, you'll see Esri. Governments use it, corporations use it, educational institutions use it, and now even newspapers and magazines are using story mapping. So you'll see Esri, the initials Esri, all over once you are aware of them. So in building a map using the ArcGIS or any other mapping technology, there are other companies that provide mapping technology, and there's open source mapping technologies available too, but Esri has 90 or 95% of the market. But whenever you're building a map, you start with a base map, and that can be a satellite image. It can be a topographic map. So you select what you want your base to be that you build upon. And then the next layer is the topographic layer. So that's overlaid over the base. So those can be flipped back and forth. You can start with a topographic layer and add a satellite image, or you can start with a satellite image and add a topographic layer. But whatever's on the bottom is called the base map. And then there are 3 elements to every map: polygons, lines, and points. So if you think about just your typical map, the dots are the cities or the restaurants or the gas stations or the hotels. Those are the dots, the places. The lines are the highways or the streams or the boundaries of the counties and states. Those are lines. And then the polygons are the areas. So if you look like at a demographic map, you'll have little areas sectioned out. This area votes Democrat. This area votes Republican. Or this area is majority Hispanic. Or this area is majority African American. Those bounded areas are called polygons. And you can also, airports, buildings, anything that's bounded is just a polygon. So this is the math of map making. And so anytime you look at a map, whether, if it's a 3D map and you see buildings, those are polygons. And this is all the math of the whole thing. And that once you get this idea of layers, which is also in story maps, once you get that idea, when you look at a map, you can start looking at the layers. And you can see, like your typical online map, Google map or whatever, you've got the base layer, which is, in the case of the standard map view, is a topographic. And then laid over that is your streets and roads and things. And so, those are lines, and then dots for the cities and different places. So you can see that those layers are there. And then when you go to satellite view, I assume that the other maps are like this. I use Google Maps almost exclusively, but Wave and the other ones, I assume you can flip to satellite view. And that changes the base map into the satellite image. And then typically you can turn on and off the streets and things to see what you want in the map. So if you start poking around on these mapping functions, you can see that you can turn on and off different layers, and you can add layers yourself and create custom maps. That's built into Google Maps, and I assume Wave and the other mapping software online. But it's all based on these 5 elements. And so that's something to keep in mind. On the right side is just a image of a geographic information system, which is actually a network. And I couldn't find any real up-to-date ones. So at the bottom, I said, you need drones added to this, because mapping has got, drones are used in all kinds of mapping now. But here they break it down into, of course, everything starts with people. And then you've got your software, which in the case of ArcGIS or Google Maps, or in our case, storymaps.com, that's your software component. And then there's your data. And that's the information that plots out the points and the lines and the polygons. It's all mathematical. even if you don't view it that way, but that's how it's interpreted. Then you have procedures that, that's how you're building your map. In our case, we have a template that Storycenter has provided for us to create a template and then load that into the story mapping software. So that's our procedure. And then, of course, you have to have a computer and a screen and a mouse and a keyboard, and a drone if you want to do some serious mapping these days. So this is my cue. This is a spreadsheet with geographical data. And I want to go to the live version. Nope, that's not it. Zoom things in the way again. There it is. Okay, can you see a spreadsheet? You never know if Zoom's going to follow you or not. Can you see it move? Okay, thank you, bro. So this is data. This is data that I collected. I took a GIS class last year, and one of my projects was to map the galleries and museums in the greater Los Angeles area. I've been gone for 35 years and things had changed, and so I wanted to collect, and I couldn't find a list. You can find a lot of lists, your local library, your local counties. You can find data that's publicly available for creating maps. This is way beyond story mapping, but I just want to point out that this is how mapping works. But I couldn't find the data set I wanted, so I created it. So here is 130 museums and galleries in the greater Los Angeles area. And I went to each website, did my searches, found their name, their address, their phone number, and the link to their website, and created this spreadsheet. And then from this spreadsheet, I loaded it into the ArcGIS software, and I created this map, which another thing that Esri offers through ArcGIS, the pro version now, is you can turn it into an app. So I can provide the link to this map, especially anybody that's in Los Angeles. You can open this map online, and when you click on one of the stars, there's the name of the institution, the address, the link to the website, and I think some of them have the hours they're open in this little pop-up. So it's a very useful map, and you can open this on a phone. You can be out and about and be in an area like downtown LA where all these museums are. And you can open this on your phone and click on it and check the hours and go to the website and all of that. So mapping has a lot of different uses. So I just wanted to point that out. And now we should be back to the presentation. And so this is the final slide in this section. This is good, 24 past. All the text in my slides from here on is generated using a large language model. I don't use the term AI because I'm with Kate Crawford from Microsoft that says artificial intelligence is neither. But what these are large language models, which are statistical generators of sentences. But they're useful in some things, and generating the text for this presentation was one use. I'll just read the beginning here that says that story maps seek to balance artistic and scientific approaches to create narratives that are both visually compelling and grounded in empirical data and research. So that's the data that you're bringing to the story mapping software. Even if it's just pictures of a family reunion, that's empirical data and research. So I like the way both the How Maps workbook and other mapping texts that I found point to this. And I guess this goes back to the two cultures theory of the early 20th century, where you have your scientific people and you have your artistic people. And hopefully that was broken down by the end of the century that says you need both, the scientific and the artistic. And story maps is a place to put those two together. By combining aesthetically pleasing designs, carefully chosen color schemes, and engaging storytelling techniques with accurate, reliable, and evidence-based information, story mappers can create narratives that are both emotionally resonant and intellectually rigorous. This balance is essential for ensuring that story maps not only capture the attention and imagination of their audience, but also convey important information and insights in a credible and trustworthy manner. So the image on the right is just one page from storymaps.com. And it talks about the immersive. So these are part of the Storymaps template. Any of you that have played around in it or that will soon be playing around in it, there are different templates to structure your map. If you're doing an actual mapping of locations, there's the Explorer Tour, which is choose your own adventure. You can do whatever you like. There's the guided tour, which is an ordering of your points. If you want people to go through in a particular sequence, you choose the guided tour. And then there's the slideshow, which is doing the graphical representation that then shows the images are the majority of the screen, but it then shows where the image is linked to on a much smaller map. So these are just the different templates that are built into Story Maps. Story Maps is free and it's much easier to use because of the limited choices. So some people will find it frustrating that you can't just do all these different mapping things. But in a short workshop like this, even though 10 weeks seems like a long time, this is actually a very short amount of time to learn about mapping and storytelling and putting all this together. And so by using storymaps.com, it helps get through the process and to get a story map your first time out. And so part of that is by limiting the choices. When you pick a template, you don't have to worry about the fonts and the colors and the layout and all that. It's all in the template. Okay. Came in under half an hour. Perfect. So are there any questions? Let's spend just a few minutes. So there's a 15-minute presentation we want to finish before the top of the hour, but we have 10 minutes or so here. If there are questions, I'm happy to, Brooke and I are happy to chat with you. And then we'll show Joe's presentation on storymaps.com and then take a break.
I have a question. Is
Sure.
Google Maps, does it have a lot of the same functionality as Esri, or are those two different things?
They have almost identical functionality.
And with Google Maps, is it free?
Yes.
So you might be better off using Google Maps if you don't want to spend the money?
Well, they each have their strengths and weaknesses. Yes. So I think the answer would be yes. If you wanted to go further into mapping without spending money on Esri, ArcGIS, yeah, Google Maps would be. It's not as powerful as ArcGIS because ArcGIS is the leading mapping software in the world. But yes, you could go much further with Google Maps for free, I guess is the way to look at it.
Can you interchange them? So if you create something in Google Maps, can you move it into Esri and vice versa?
That's tricky. That's tricky. You can use the same components, but they act differently. So it's not a straight one-to-one. No, it's not that simple. I see Beth has her hand up or had her hand up.
I actually had sort of two questions. One of them was in regard actually the benefit or the added benefit of having the premium. I'm talking about story maps now, I guess. The differences between paying for, and I sort of tooled around in story maps a little bit without the premium. And I'm wondering what if this is something that is going to be used to supplement something in our, say our professional life or professional adjacent, the benefit of purchasing and what one gets.
You get a lot more features for I think it's $10 a month. I can't remember, but yes, it's much more powerful, the paid version, more templates, more things that you can adjust and design yourself. Brooks in the chat too. Now I have to open the chat.
So your recommendation would be, yes, if you're going to be using this for
Yes.
something other than just kind of like you're sending it to somebody to, as like a, here, this is a birthday video for you, would be to invest in the paid one.
Yes. Yeah, because then you can do the more elaborate mapping tours. A lot of cities now have these mapping tours where they have audio. You go to the location, you click the button, and you hear somebody tell a story about that location, these kinds of things. That the paid version can do is much more powerful, can do many more things.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So is it Carolyn or Caroline? I don't.
Caroline, but it's fine.
Caroline.
Either
Yeah,
way.
you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was just very quickly, you said you did a course on this, and I was wondering what that was.
It was at a local community college, and it's called GIS.
Okay.
There are there are private companies, private colleges, technical colleges. I use the local community college because the man teaching the course, I learned about him through the LA County GIS club, and he's the leading educator in Southern California. So he happened to be at the local community college. So I'm like, well, heck, I'll just
Wow, lucky.
do that for a couple $100 instead of paying $1,000 at a technical school. But
All right, so I could look
in
around
that
New
case,
York
you
and
get
see-
access when you take a GIS course, you get
Yeah.
access to the professional version of ArcGIS, which is worth, I think, $1,000 a year, something like that. It's the professional software.
Okay.
And
All
most of the people in the class were surveyors or county employees that wanted to get a raise, wanted to move up. Parks department people. I mean, if once you realize what's going on, you start noticing that this stuff is everywhere. And so counties, police departments, any correctional, all the parks departments,
Yeah.
public works. I mean, it's on and on and on. They all use this software.
Wow. Okay, cool. I'll look out for a course then. Thanks.
Yeah. Priya's hand keeps going up and down. Go ahead, Priya.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay.
Many,
I don't know if it's the software or if you're unsure. I don't know. Go ahead.
so there were so many things touched on, and I just didn't want to kind of have to keep it all together. But just to say, so there were two questions. First of all, would it be, I work for federal government in public works, actually. So also architecture, part of parks, they all also do have. But would it be correct in assuming that institutions like that, and as also universities, would have the version of ArcGIS, just from your
Yes.
experience?
Yes.
They would. Okay,
Yes.
okay, so then that was one. And the second question I had is, would it, when we develop something like a map, like what you did, would that be a standalone map, or is it always kind of feeding into like some kind of a master map? Or is that only with membership? I guess I just wanted to make sure I understood correctly. So if we worked on a project and say we put in all the, say an encyclopedia of heritage homes or whatever, something, we contributed to a specific geographical area. So if we did it in an institutional way, does it always contribute to the master map, or is that something that's not a default?
It's not a default. So so now we're talking about the professional ArcGIS software.
Correct.
When you create a map there, it's yours. It's stored locally on your computer. The data sets, the instructions, all of that is stored on your computer as a set of files, a very large set of files at times. And then it's your choice what you want to do with that. You can then contribute that to a larger project. Or in the case of my LA map, and I see in the chat, I will drop the link in there and the link to the slides. You'll have all of this. In my case, with the map of the museums of Los Angeles, I used another Esri product to turn that into an online app. And so that lives in Esri world, right? So they could decide to turn that off. The point being is you decide what you want to do with it, and you have to be aware of who you're giving it to and how they're presenting it, because at any time they can just turn that off. So depending on your intentions, you can create your own website and put it up there, and then you're in control of what happens to it. And this is true of all of our digital work. I'm a big proponent of having your own website, even if you never post anything or never use it. But occasionally, if you make something, you just put it there and then you're in control of it.
Right. Last question, just because if you're considering a project for social good, say, for example, I'm kind of working with students in a participatory kind of a project. So that would mean many people in the community could contribute data to like a digital kind of map. For example, just say housing vacancies or just something simple that everybody would benefit out of. So when there are multiple users contributing to it, is there a way to do that in a way that actually benefits? So
Yes.
we could, yeah.
That's built into Esri's software. They actually have a way to create survey forms or data collection forms. Yes, and then you can post those publicly, and people can anonymously contribute data to your project. Yes, it's a huge, expensive program, and it does a lot of things.
And so only under the paid, is that what you're saying? Only under the
This
paid?
is the ArcGIS. This is the professional version, has all of these features. Yeah. Again, next week, the Esri people are coming, and they will be talking about ArcGIS Storymapping. You know, there was an intermediate version, but they finally simplified it and made this consumer version that we're using called Storymap. But there's an intermediate version that is not very expensive. It used to be free. I think now it's paid. And that's what they'll be talking about next week. But they're all based on the professional mapping software ArcGIS. So I should have made a slide, but I forgot to make a slide that said that there are 3 layers to this mapping software business of Esri's. And we're at the free version with our story maps that we're working on. Then there's this intermediate version, which was the first story mapping software they put out. But it's really based on the professional version, so it's quite complicated. And they've deprecated it. I just got a message. I opened up one of my old story maps, and so that's going away. So someday I'll not be able to show that. I might show it later if we have time. So Kay has her hand up.
I have a question about how, like, okay, so if you set up your website and you've created your map in Story Maps, can you create like an executable that's freestanding so that you don't have to have the story maps like you don't have to continue your subscription? Can you upload the executable, or do you have to have that Esri framework underneath it?
Yeah, no, to display it, you need the software. Yeah, so
You could
embed the storymap.com that you create. You can embed that in your own website, but you still have the Esri software. So if you have the paid version, I'm not sure what happens, if your subscription lapses. I'm going to assume that you can still access the story, that it's still stored by Esri. But yeah, the software is so complicated. There's no way to just display your stuff without using GIS software. There's too many things going on. So what you can do is recreate it as, say, a blog post, but it would be a complete recreation. It wouldn't be using the Esri software. But depending on how complicated it is, and you can certainly recreate it in a Google map, which is free and is not going to go in our lifetime anyway. So that would be sort of an intermediate way to recreate the story map that we're making in a different software that will remain free. I can't imagine Google will ever take maps to a paid version or get rid of maps. I mean, it's the center of their business. So that would be a way to do it, where you could display it and not worry about if your subscription lapses or if Esri makes changes. But that would be a recreation. It wouldn't be, it wouldn't have the functionality of the mapping software. Well, it would have some of the function in Google Maps. I have not tried to recreate a story, so I'm not sure how far you can get, but Google does have layers and points and lines and polygons. It's all built into Google Maps. So you could probably recreate it almost completely.
Thank you.
Sure. All right. So again, this is large language model generated text. So I'm not attached to it. I don't want you to get too attached to it, but I just want to talk about the more contemporary issues that are swirling around mapping. And so I just grabbed a couple of pictures. Since I'm relying on this sort of Bible of mapping that's 30 years old, the first thing I wanted to point out is if you're looking for a career in mapping, learn how to pilot a drone and learn how to use ArcGIS, because you will have a great career at the local, county, state, or federal level, because everybody is using drones to survey and map everything, all new construction. My teacher, I mentioned I took that GIS class. My teacher lays out the Coachella Music Festival every year, and he uses drones, and the services are underground, and they need to know within half an inch where all their services are so that they can lay out the camping areas so that people don't drive tent stakes through their water and electrical lines. And of course, this place is totally wired. I mean, Wi-Fi and multimedia and all that. So there's just, it's a huge issue. And he has to remap it each year as they add different features and expand the parking and more people come. And so that's just one project that he has. But the Forest Service, I mean, everybody is now using drones. It's cheaper, faster, and better than sending out teams of surveyors. And so, so I just wanted to point that out. Contemporary mapping practices are characterized by a multidisciplinary approach that draws on principles, theories, and approaches from various fields, including geography, psychology, neuroscience, and computer science. This holistic perspective recognizes maps as complex cultural artifacts that not only represent physical space, but also reflect and shape our perceptions, emotions, and experiences of place. So this is the book I've been referring to. Again, it's 30 years old, but yet it was quite forward-thinking. So there is a lot in there about graphic information systems, and it's just not the latest artificial intelligence, a word I don't like, but anyway, AI. It doesn't have that, but it's quite up to date. So he, as I mentioned earlier, relies on this artistic versus scientific, which is for those of you that studied history or history of technology, it's the two cultures approach from, I think, from the 1930s, where there was talk in academia about there's two different kinds of academics. There's the scientific and then there's the artistic, and they sort of separated them. And in this book from 30 years ago, he's trying to put them back together. So, and that's something I did in my career as a technical glassblower. I tried to keep the art and the science married together. The artistic approach is intuitive and holistic, achieving improvements through experience supplemented by critical examination, where the scientific approach is more inductive and often reductionist, which is the concern, breaking the problem into manageable pieces with the assumption that the total picture will become clear by systematically examining each individual part of the process. So in building our story maps, we have the opportunity to switch back and forth. You know, there's the technical, geographic, location-driven, you know, the metadata embedded in the images, you know, all of that stuff is the technical or scientific. But we have to keep in mind we're trying to tell a story, and we want to do it in an engaging and pleasant way, you know, through the design and the placement of our images. So one of the key ideas that I've enjoyed is this sense of place. And so this is sort of the basket where you collect all these different ways of looking at space and our place in it to generate what we call a sense of place. So this involves your identity, your history, your location, your culture. You put all that together, and that's your sense of place. And Edward Ralph, or Ted Ralph, emphasizes the subjective and experiential dimensions of place, arguing that our understanding of place goes beyond its physical characteristics and is deeply influenced by the meanings and emotions we attach to it. And so this is what you're trying to draw out of your audience. You're trying to present your story in a way that they can connect to and understand from their own position, standpoint, identity, however you want to look at it. Ted Ralph talks about place attachment, which is sort of, that's, where I'm from kind of attachment to place and culture. Place identity, that's more, again, the cultural aspect and the personal put together. Identity is not static, but it's continually negotiated through interactions with places and other individuals. So it's a changing, constantly changing thing, our place identity, as our place evolves and as we evolve. But it's just, you want to be aware of that. One of my favorite concepts of his is placelessness. And to me, this is very important. The homogenization of places and loss of unique local character results in a feeling of placelessness. To counteract this, he advocates for the preservation and celebration of the distinctive qualities that give places their meaning and significance. And so a corollary to that is the idea of no place. And you're no place when you're standing in line at McDonald's. I don't care if you're in Cairo or Sao Paulo or Taiwan. When you're standing in line at McDonald's, you're no place. Or when you're sitting in an airport lounge waiting for a plane, those are no place because they're the same everywhere. So they have no unique identifying characteristics. Not no, but very few, I guess is the right way to say it. The language changes on the menu or the schedule screen, but they're places that are completely interchangeable. Shopping malls, these kinds of places. And so they're not unique, and so you can identify those. And then lastly, Ralph distinguishes between insideness, a deep and authentic connection to a real place, and outsideness, a more superficial or detached relationship. So again, if you grew up in a small town that had a real culture and a real identity, and then you found yourself living in a giant subdivision where every house is the same and everybody looks the same and has the same income level, that's the difference between insideness and outsideness. I'm a big fan of Charles Sanders Peirce, a 19th century pragmatist, philosopher, mathematician. He was a polymath, as they say, had so many interests that he could never hold a job. So here's a guy whose father taught at Harvard, and he could never get a job at a university because he just had too many interests. But he was one of the first people that talked about signs. And so I wanted to present, so I've updated this. He had a tripart or a Trinitarian approach, if you're of that bent, where there's an object. So it could be a thing, a place, an idea, concept that you're trying to communicate. So that's the real thing, even if it's just an idea or a concept. That's the thing, the object. And the way you communicate that is the sign, right? So you could communicate it with an image or an interview or a map. So there's the sign that points to the object, but they're not the same. It's the idea of the map is not the landscape. The landscape is the landscape. The map is the sign that explains or points to the landscape. And then that signifies to the audience what you're trying to communicate. So it's Peirce's idea is the three-part. And this is what all networking software is made on. All your metadata and all your different digital objects, they're all based on this idea of Peirce's, that there's the object, there's the sign, which is the signifier. And that's the audience then takes the sign and creates meaning. And so what I've added to this is the idea as the audience is the most important. So this leans on current thinking about social media and things. You're trying to communicate to an audience. And so whenever you're making a story or making any kind of media, you're trying to communicate something to a particular audience. And you can't make something that communicates to everybody. That's a fool's errand. You have to decide who you're trying to communicate with and how they would understand what you're trying to say. And so I've added the fourth piece, that the storyteller has to identify what they're trying to say and who they're trying to say it to. And that's the starting point, that then you identify the object or the story, and then you create the signs to signify the story in a way the audience can understand. So as I mentioned before, the slides are available. There's a big document that is connected to this that was generated that has even more concepts in it. All of that will be available first on the website, and it may become its own website. I'm not sure. And the other piece that I wanted to bring out today, and I mentioned it earlier, is the neuroscientist, psychiatrist, and all-around scholar Ian McGilchrist from Oxford, who has spent the last 30 years studying the human brain. And he focuses on the idea that we have this bicameral brain. And there was a lot of talk about this in the 80s, and then it was all discounted about, the left brain does this and the right brain does that. And, a lot of it was made up. And when it was researched, it was all pretty much discounted. But the following 30 years have led Dr. McGilchrist to realize, and again, the technology improved, the ability to study people with brain injuries has improved, and the documentation of it. And so he's come to this idea that the right hemisphere of the brain, of course, this is more complicated for left-handed people, but we're just talking about, the majority. The right hemisphere of the brain is more closely associated with holistic, intuitive, and context-dependent processing. So this is the artistic point of view. Then he points out that the left hemisphere is more the reductionist point of view. This is where we keep our stereotypes. This is where we keep, the small ideas and concepts that we use every day. And this is how we navigate the world, by ignoring the 99% of the information that's flowing into us through our senses in order to be able to function. If we could see all the colors of the spectrum and hear all the sounds and, all the smells and everything, we would just be completely overwhelmed. And so we have learned, or we've evolved, to be able to focus. And so he illustrates this by every task of an animal, and he claims that this sort of is across the mammals and even farther, this bicameral brain, that we have two tasks. First of all, we have to find the food, and so we have to be able to focus. We have to recognize which plants are poisonous. We have to recognize our hunting ground. And so this is the focused attention. But if you get too focused on what you're doing, you become somebody else's lunch. So at the same time, we have to be able to be aware of our surroundings at all times. And so we have this holistic way of looking things, and then we have this focused way of looking at things. And he claims that our Western culture has kind of overdone it on the left hemisphere, grasping, controlling, stereotyping, chopping everything into pieces, reductionist scientific point of view. And he thinks that a healthy culture is more balanced, and he has a lot of trepidation, but then so does everybody else I know. So there's, here's the rule I broke. Don't put a slide full of text up, but I did it anyway. So again, it's for reference. And then there's the up-to-the-minute neuroscience that keeps identifying different types of neurons. So it's been 20 or 30 years since they discovered that there were place cells. So they've, in their research on the human brain and on human memory, there's this way that the neurons store both the memory and the location in different types of cells. And so that led to then searching for all kinds of other cells. And so following on to that, they realized that these cells navigate by grids. So it's not just a point, like a point on a map, referring back to the mapping techniques, but it's more of a map that's sort of gridded, again, in the neurons of the brain so that it interacts with the memories. No one neuron stores one thing. I mean, you can see from this image of 1 cubic millimeter of the human brain. This is a very new image from Google and Harvard. That I think they said there was 40 or 50,000 connections in this 1 cubic millimeter. So, and that's half the size of a peanut. But working together, this is how we store memories. And then they've identified, so then there's the grid cells. So the memories are actually sort of mapped together. They're not, again, not reduced to one memory here and one memory there. They've sort of connected as a grid. And then recently they found these direction cells. And so not only is there a place connected to your memory, but your orientation to that place is also remembered. So to me, it's fascinating. It's too much for many people. I understand that. So I just want to mention it. And there are resources. This document that I generated has a great list of resources that refer to this stuff. And then you can't give a presentation without being critical, can you? So I wanted to look and found that there's something called feminist geography that's been around for 40 years. And then there's a critical cartography that's also 40 or 50 years old. And so everything that I've said today has been criticized thoroughly, and it's always good to look at that. I picked the book cover just because I just love it. It's so graphic and almost map-like. It's actually a Portuguese book. It hasn't been translated yet, but it's mapping dissidence. So it's counter mapping is one term for it. When we see these maps in the New York Times, it's good to take a critical look at them. And what are they trying to tell us? And is what they're telling us true? It's not just the text in the articles, but also the graphs and the maps and all of that has to be looked at with the gimlet eye, as it were. And again, there are links in the document. Donna Haraway is a very famous feminist critic, and she wrote about technology, and her memory is well preserved online. There's some great resources, and so those links are in there as well. And so it's 5 minutes at the top of the hour, and I just want to remind us that we're all in this together. And I don't know about you, but this image changed my life. And if you've ever heard interviews with the astronauts, as soon as they saw this, their lives changed too, realizing that, there's just one place and there's just a lot of people. So I want to say thanks, and we can chat as long as you like.